She walked into the wrong hotel. Now the most feared man in Asia won't let her leave, because she carries a secret worth more than her life. The storm came without mercy. Seoul drowned in sheets of rain so thick you couldn't see 3 feet in front of your face, and somewhere in the flooded chaos of Gangnam, a blind black woman from Chicago was about to collide with the most dangerous man in Asia, and neither of them was ready for what came next. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a decade of buried secrets finally detonates, stay with me until the end. Like this video, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain hit Seoul like a punishment. It came down in walls, not sheets. Thick vertical curtains of water that turned the streets of Gangnam into fast-moving rivers and swallowed the gutters whole. Street vendors abandoned their stalls. Taxi drivers pulled over and refused fares. Even the neon signs that normally bled their colors across the wet pavement seemed to flicker in something close to hesitation, their reflections fracturing apart in the flood rushing along the curb. Amara Brooks did not have the luxury of hesitation. She moved through it anyway. Her white cane swept in tight arcs ahead of her, the tip skimming over submerged concrete, catching the edge of a curb here, glancing off a fire hydrant there. The cane was carbon fiber, hollow, custom-built with a weighted ball tip that gave her slightly better feedback on wet surfaces than the standard aluminum models. She'd paid $400 for it. Right now, in the middle of a monsoon that had apparently decided to personally destroy her, she would have paid $4,000. The cello case on her back was the real problem. It was a hard-shell case, black, with padded straps that distributed the weight across both shoulders, but it had been designed for concert halls and airport terminals, not for being worn through a flooding South Korean street while rain hammered the fiberglass at a 40-degree angle. The weight shifted when she moved fast. It threw off her center of gravity in ways her body had spent years learning to compensate for, and right now compensation was the only thing keeping her upright. Inside that case was a 1742 Guarneri del Gesù cello. There were fewer than 200 of them left in the world. The instrument had survived wars, an Atlantic crossing, and 3 centuries of human catastrophe. It had not survived Chicago. Or rather, it had survived Chicago perfectly well. It was the loan arrangement Amara had made with the private collector who owned it that had not survived. The collector had called her 3 days before her scheduled departure from O'Hare, his voice cheerful in the particular way of people who are about to detonate your life, and explained that he'd had a change of heart. He needed the instrument back. He was terribly sorry. He would, of course, return her deposit in full. The deposit she'd used to pay for the Seoul International Music Festival booking. The festival she'd been building toward for 2 years. She'd bought the cello back from him, emptied her emergency savings, called in a favor from a former mentor who loaned her the remainder without interest, and without asking questions she couldn't answer. She'd made the flight with 18 hours to spare. She'd landed in Seoul jet-lagged and vibrating with the particular anxiety of someone who has spent their entire savings on a single gamble and is now watching the weather forecast deteriorate. And then the monsoon had hit. She was looking for the Sejong Cultural Center, where the festival committee was holding a pre-event check-in for performing artists. She had the address in her phone's navigation app. The navigation app had been working fine until approximately 8 minutes ago, when the storm had apparently convinced her phone that she was standing in the middle of the Han River. The GPS had been rerouting her in circles ever since, and she'd made the decision to trust her own instincts over the algorithm, which in hindsight was the kind of decision that sounded reasonable right up until you were standing shin-deep in runoff water with a priceless 18th century instrument strapped to your back and absolutely no idea where you were. The noise of the storm was almost too much. That was the part sighted people never understood. Blindness didn't make her hearing superhuman. That was a myth she'd spent her entire adult life correcting. What it did was make her attention superhuman. She'd trained herself to parse sound the way other people parse vision, to build spatial maps from echo and ambient noise, to read a room from the acoustics before she ever stepped into it. In normal conditions, she could navigate an unfamiliar city block faster than most people expected. In conditions like this, with rain hammering every surface simultaneously, drowning out the distinct audio signatures she relied on, turning the city into one undifferentiated roar, she was effectively flying blind in the dark, with both instruments broken. She stopped walking. Her heart was doing something unpleasant against her ribs. She breathed through it deliberately, the way she'd been taught, counting to 4 on the inhale and 4 on the exhale, grounding herself in the sensations she could still read clearly. Pavement underfoot, water at her shins, wind from the northeast coming in gusts that rocked the cello case. Somewhere to her left, the high clear note of water rushing through a storm drain. Somewhere ahead, and slightly right, something large and solid. The acoustic shadow of a big building, the way the rain's roar was interrupted and reshaped. A building? Big. Close. She moved toward the acoustic shadow. The cane found a step. Then another. Then a flat surface. A covered entryway, the rain suddenly retreating, the roar dropping to a hiss as she moved beneath some kind of canopy. Her shoes found dry marble. She stopped, rain still dripping from her hair, her jacket soaked through to the skin beneath, her shoulders aching from the weight of the case, and she breathed. Then she heard the lobby. Marble floors, high ceilings. She could tell from the reverb, the way the ambient sound expanded and deepened the moment she pushed through what her hand identified as a heavy revolving door. A large space, climate-controlled, the temperature dropping instantly against her wet skin. Soft music coming from somewhere to her right, piano, something classical and anodyne. The distant percussion of a busy kitchen. The muted conversation of people who were speaking in the careful voices of those who expected to be heard by the wrong ears. A hotel. A large, expensive one, from the feel of the floor and the weight of the silence around the edges of the noise. Amara stood just inside the entrance, water pooling at her feet, rain dripping off the hem of her jacket onto what was probably very expensive marble, and for a moment she allowed herself the small luxury of not moving. Just standing in the dry and the warmth. Just breathing. She needed to find the check-in desk. She needed to explain herself and ask for directions, or the use of a phone, or a towel, or all three. She needed to be careful about the cello. The temperature differential between outside and inside would cause the wood to expand slightly, and she'd need to let it acclimate slowly rather than opening the case immediately. She shifted the straps on her shoulders, oriented herself toward what sounded like the main desk based on the ambient conversation patterns, and began to walk. She did not hear the footsteps on the staircase above her. She was not aware of the man descending them. Tut. Kang Tae-jun had killed 3 people before the age of 22. He didn't say this as a boast, and he didn't think about it as a confession. It was simply a fact about himself, the way it was a fact that he was 6'2", that he had a scar along his left jaw from a knife fight at 19, that he preferred his whiskey without ice and his information without varnish. He had killed 3 people, and he had ordered the deaths of considerably more, and he had built something from the ruins of his father's empire that his father could not have imagined. Not because his father lacked ambition, but because his father had lacked patience. Tae-jun had patience in abundance. He was 34 years old, and he ran the Hanul Syndicate from the penthouse of the Hansong Imperial Hotel, the property his father had purchased legitimately in 1998 as a front operation, and that Tae-jun had spent 12 years transforming into something that operated with enough surface legitimacy to satisfy government auditors and enough concealed infrastructure to move money, weapons, and intelligence across 7 countries without leaving a trail that any prosecutor had yet managed to follow. The hotel was beautiful. It employed 600 people. It had a Michelin-starred restaurant on the 14th floor and a spa that a prominent lifestyle magazine had once called the finest in Southeast Asia. It was also, at any given time, home to approximately 40 armed men who reported directly to Tae-jun. He was descending the main staircase when his phone buzzed. He did not break his stride. The call was from his second-in-command, Park Sung-ho, and the content of it was not something he wanted to hear. The Jiho shipment, Sung-ho said, without preamble. Tae-jun appreciated that. He'd trained the people around him to dispense with preamble years ago, because preamble was how you wasted seconds you couldn't recover. It's been hit. Busan Highway, near the tunnel interchange. They took the whole load. Tae-jun's hand tightened on the stair railing. He kept his face neutral. There were cameras in this lobby, and there were people who watched the cameras, and he had not maintained power for 12 years by letting his face betray him in places where it could be read. "How many men?" he said. 4 down, 2 critical. The drivers survived. They were left alive, which means someone wanted us to know it was deliberate. Who? We think the Chongsan group, Yoon's people. Taejun exhaled slowly through his nose. Yoondai Seok. 63 years old, Busan-based, had been circling the edges of Hanul territory for 18 months, with the cautious persistence of a man who believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room. He was not smarter than everyone else in the room, but he was patient, and he had money, and he had apparently decided that now was the time to make his move. Get me a location on Yoon's logistics coordinator, Taejun said. I want it clean, and I want it fast, and I want whoever gave them the shipment route standing in front of me by morning. Understood. He ended the call and continued down the stairs. He was thinking about the shipment, about Yoon, about the geometry of the response that would need to happen in the next 48 hours. And that was why, when he was 4 steps from the lobby floor, he was not paying attention to the woman who had just walked through his front door. He registered her peripherally. A woman, black, late 20s, soaking wet from the storm, carrying something large on her back. A white cane in her right hand. She was moving toward the front desk at a steady pace, her cane sweeping in short, economical arcs, her head tilted slightly as though she was listening rather than looking. He noted the cane and the tilt and recalibrated. Blind. American, from the jacket, a North Face, Chicago Bulls logo on the chest, still visible through the soaking. He was 2 steps from the bottom when she made her turn. She was correcting toward the desk, pivoting right, and the adjustment was slightly wider than she'd calculated because the lobby's acoustic profile was probably misleading her. The marble floors played tricks on sound, bounced it in patterns that weren't immediately intuitive. Her shoulder caught the exterior edge of the bottom stair post. The contact threw her balance. The cello case on her back lurched with its own momentum, dragging her weight backward and right. Her cane swept and found nothing. She went into him. The impact was harder than it had any right to be. She was not a small woman, and the combined weight of her body and the case behind her hit his chest like a compressed force. And for one fraction of a second, Taejun Kang, the man that the Korean criminal underworld called Cheonjai, the monarch, actually stepped backward. He caught her. His hands closed on her arms before she could fall, pulling her upright, taking the weight. And then they were standing in the middle of his lobby with his hands on a stranger's arms, and every armed man in the building suddenly paying close attention. He heard the sound of holsters unsnapping. Saw, in his peripheral vision, 4 of his men moving from their positions. Sir, one of them, Kim, his head of floor security, was already 2 steps closer, hand at his side, eyes on the woman. Stop, Taejun said. Quiet. Flat. The kind of voice that ended movement. Everyone stopped. The woman in his hands was breathing hard. She'd caught herself against him, one hand gripping his jacket lapel without apparently being aware of it, the other white-knuckled on the cane. Her hair was plastered to her face. She was drenched to the core. He could feel the chill of her jacket through the fabric of his suit. She lifted her face. She couldn't see him. He knew that. He could see the way her eyes, dark brown, fixed somewhere slightly left of his actual face, were oriented on sound rather than image. She was reading him through his breathing, through the tension in his arms, through the environmental data she was processing in real time. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was low, controlled, with the precise enunciation of someone who'd had vocal training and was using it now as armor. American accent, Midwest, not coastal. I miscalculated the floor plan. I'll get out of your way. She started to pull back. His hands didn't move. She stopped pulling. In the silence, with his men watching and her water dripping onto the marble and the storm hammering the glass exterior of his hotel, Taejun looked at her. He looked at her face, at the strong line of her jaw, the set of her mouth, the particular angle of her chin when she was trying to project calm over fear. He looked at the way she held herself despite being soaking wet and disoriented in a space she couldn't see. He looked at her the way he had taught himself to look at everything, not for what was presented, but for what was underneath. And then he saw the scar. It was beneath her jaw, on the left side. Old. 10 years old at least. The skin smooth and slightly paler than the surrounding tissue. A road burn. The kind left by pavement when a body went across it at speed. The kind you get when you don't have time to get your hands up because the impact comes too fast. The kind left by a highway accident. Something happened to his chest that he had no name for. It wasn't sentiment. He had disciplined sentiment out of himself a long time ago. It wasn't recognition, exactly, because he had never met this woman in his life. It was something older than either of those things. Something that lived in the part of him that he'd sealed off at 24 and told himself he would never look at again. He leaned forward. She stiffened. He was close enough that she could certainly hear him breathing, and she was smart enough to know that whatever was happening was not the normal trajectory of a chance collision in a hotel lobby. He put his mouth close to her ear. "Mine," he said. The word was barely a sound, a breath with shape. In Korean, in English, it sat in the air between them and meant the same thing in both languages. The lobby went completely still. Even the piano music seemed to stop, though it hadn't. Amara Brooks stood in the grip of a man she couldn't see, in a hotel she hadn't meant to enter, in a city half drowning in a monsoon, and she had absolutely no way of knowing what had just been said to her or what it cost the man who'd said it. But she felt it. She felt the weight of it. The way the air changed around a word like that when it came from someone who meant it in the specific, irrevocable way that this man clearly meant it. Her pulse was already elevated from the fall. It went higher now, for a different reason. "Let go of me," she said, still controlled, still precise. The voice of a woman who had been in situations where fear was a liability and had trained the tremor out of herself a long time ago. Taejun released her arms. He stepped back, and then he turned to Kim without looking at the woman again and said, in Korean, at his normal volume, in his normal tone, "Take her to the Beck suite, dry clothes, food, whatever she needs. Post 2 men outside the door. Nobody enters without my direct authorization." Kim blinked. "Sir, she came in off the street. We don't know." "I know," Taejun said. "That's all that matters right now." He walked away. The Beck suite was on the 19th floor. It was named for a shade of white, the traditional Korean concept of pure white, a color that carried its own weight of meaning. And it was decorated accordingly. Everything in it was pale, white upholstery, cream walls, milky marble floors that caught the ambient light and multiplied it. The view from its floor-to-ceiling windows encompassed the full sweep of the Seoul skyline, and beyond it, the dark ribbon of the Han River. Amara sat on the edge of the bed. She'd been walked here by a man who'd said nothing beyond necessary navigational instructions. Left, 3 steps up, the door is ahead of you. And she'd allowed herself to be walked because the alternative was standing in a lobby full of men with weapons and no information. She had made a calculation. Comply for now. Gather data. Reassess when she understood the geometry better. She'd counted the steps from the elevator. She'd felt the slight directional changes in air pressure that indicated doorways. She'd built a rough map in her head and stored it. She set the cello case down carefully and ran her hands across it. Latches intact. No cracks in the shell. She'd checked the instrument itself when she had more information about how long she was going to be in this room and whether temperature stabilization was a realistic possibility. A woman had come in shortly after her arrival. Soft footsteps, light perfume, the rustle of fabric being placed on a surface. A knock on the bathroom door. "I've left dry clothes for you. There's towels on the counter." Then the door had closed, and Amara was alone. She sat and thought. The man in the lobby. The way his people had reacted. Not to her, but to him. The way all sound had reorganized itself around his position the moment he'd spoken. She'd been in enough rooms with enough people to understand that kind of gravitational pull. You didn't develop that kind of command presence in a normal life. The word he'd said? Mine. She did not know what it meant yet. But she knew, in the cellular, instinctive way she'd learned to trust, that it meant something specific, not possession in the crude sense, something older than that, something that implied a history she didn't have access to. She got up and went to the window. She pressed one hand flat against the glass and felt the vibration of the rain against it, the storm still battering the exterior of the building, and thought about her father, Michael Brooks. International financial consultant, Northwestern graduate, 15-year resident of Chicago's Hyde Park neighborhood, jazz enthusiast, terrible cook, the man who had taught her to play cello from the age of 4, who had read her every word of every book she'd ever loved, who had driven her to every lesson and recital and audition until the night a truck had run a red light on the I-94 and taken him from her in approximately 3 seconds flat. She had been 19. She had woken up in a hospital with bandages around her eyes and a doctor explaining that the damage to her optic nerves was permanent and she would need to begin preparing for a life without sight. She had not cried. Even then, even at 19 with both parents gone and her vision destroyed, she had not cried. Her father had spent her entire childhood teaching her that grief was a resource to be managed, not a reaction to be performed. And she had learned that lesson so thoroughly that sometimes she worried it had taken something from her that she should have been able to keep. She took her hand off the window. The door knocked. "Come in," she said. 2 sets of footsteps. One was the man from the lobby, the head of security, she thought, based on the weight of his tread and the particular stillness he carried, the way trained men move differently from civilians. The other footsteps she didn't recognize. "He wants to see you," the security man said. In English, accented but precise. "Who is he?" Amara said. A pause. The kind of pause that contained a decision about how much to say. "His name is Kang Tai-jun," the man said. "He owns this hotel." "What does he want with me?" Another pause. "You should ask him that yourself," the man said. And something in his tone, not quite discomfort, but adjacent to it, told her that this was not a question he wanted to be responsible for answering. She picked up her cane. "Lead the way," she said. Boy, the penthouse occupied the entire top floor. She knew this before the elevator doors opened because the ascent had taken longer than it should have for 19 floors, and because the air pressure changed in a way that indicated they'd bypassed the standard mechanical floor and gone directly to a custom level. The doors opened onto a foyer. She could tell from the slightly smaller echo, and then they were walking across something that felt like hardwood, and then the room opened up around her like a cathedral. High ceilings. She could feel it in the sound. The way voices would carry here, the way the ambient noise of the city far below came through as a low continuous presence, rather than the specific sound signatures she could usually parse. Rain against glass on multiple sides. The smell of cigarette smoke, faint, old. Someone had smoked here recently, but not in the last hour. Under that, something expensive, whiskey, maybe. The particular mineral note of high-end leather furniture. And then from across the room, his voice. "Sit down." Not a request, not quite a command. The tone of a man who operated in a register where the distinction had long since ceased to matter. She located the direction, moved toward it, found the edge of a chair. Leather, low, facing what the airflow suggested was a large desk or table, and sat. "You know who I am?" he said. "The man who owns the hotel," she said. "The man my taxi driver this morning apparently turned pale at the mention of, based on my phone's navigation history, which I know you've probably already checked." A silence. Then, "You're not afraid." "I'm calculating," she said. "That's different." "What are you calculating?" Whether the man who said mine to a stranger in his lobby is dangerous in the way that means I should run, or dangerous in the way that means he knows something I don't. Another silence. Longer this time. "Your name is Amara Brooks," he said. "You were born in Chicago. You've been blind for 10 years. You play the cello, not as a hobby. You perform. You're here for the Seoul International Music Festival." He was reading from something. She could hear the slight pause pattern that meant eyes moving across a page or a screen. "Your father's name was Michael Brooks," he continued, and his voice changed. A fraction, barely enough to register. But she caught it. "He died in a highway accident on the I-94 when you were 19. The official cause was listed as a collision with a commercial vehicle that failed to yield at a traffic signal." Amar's hands tightened on her knees. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because the accident wasn't an accident." The rain hit the glass. The city hummed 40 floors below. Somewhere in the penthouse, something ticked. A clock. Old, mechanical. Each beat distinct. "The official cause was wrong," Taejun said, "and I've known it was wrong for 10 years, because I know who arranged it, and I know why." A pause. "And I've been waiting, for a very long time, for a moment, when I could tell you without putting you in more danger than the telling would cause." Amar could feel her pulse in her temples. She kept her breathing even. She kept her face neutral. She was very, very good at keeping her face neutral. "You're going to tell me," she said, "that my father was involved in something you know about. Your father built the financial architecture for the most significant criminal operation in South Korea," Taejun said. "He didn't know that's what he was building at first. He thought he was constructing shell companies for a group of international investment firms. By the time he understood what it was, he was already too deep. He tried to get out. A beat. They didn't let him get out. They, Amara said, a rival organization. They wanted access to the records your father had built. Encrypted accounts, asset trails, holding structures across 6 countries. The total value was in the billions. They thought if they took your father, they could force the access out of him. She was breathing very carefully now. They miscalculated, Taejun said. Your father wouldn't give them anything, so they staged the accident instead. They took him out and hoped to recover the records another way. A pause that had something under it, something she couldn't quite read. You survived the crash. Your blindness was a consequence of the same impact. I know that, Amara said, and her voice came out flatter than she intended. What you don't know, he said, is that they know you survived. They've known for the past 3 months. Someone leaked your name in connection with a cultural exchange program you applied to, and it reached the wrong ears. The clock ticked. What do they think I have? She said. Taejun was quiet for a moment. The records were never recovered, he said. Not by them, and not by us. Your father was careful. Whatever he did with them before he died, nobody has been able to locate them. The people who killed him believe he may have passed the access to you before the accident. He didn't, Amar said. I know that's what you believe. I know that's the truth. Another silence. This one was different. It had the quality of a man choosing his next words with the particular care he reserves for information he has been sitting on for a long time and is only now releasing. Do you know what your father used to say about you? Taejun said. When he and my father? When they worked together? Amar's throat did something involuntary. She controlled it. Tell me, she said. He said you could hear a piece of music once and carry it in you forever, Taejun said. He said you had a memory for music that he'd never seen in anyone else, that once something was in you, it never left. The clock ticked. The rain hit the glass. Amara sat very still. He was proud of it, Taejun continued, and now his voice had something in it that she hadn't heard yet. Something quieter than everything else, something that cost him to say. He talked about it constantly, how you would perform something from memory that you'd heard twice, 3 years before. He said you were extraordinary. Her hands were flat on her thighs now, pressing down. He used to bring recordings, Taejun said, of your recitals. My father would pretend he was humoring him. He wasn't humoring him. He kept everyone. Stop, Amara said. The word came out harder than she intended. The room absorbed it. I'm sorry, Taejun said. Not performative, not the apology of someone managing a situation. The apology of someone who had been carrying something for a long time. You were going to tell me what they want, Amara said. Her voice was back. Flat, controlled, instrument precise. And what you want, and why I'm in this penthouse instead of a police station. You're in this penthouse because the people who killed your father launched a citywide operation to locate you approximately 2 hours ago, Taejun said. They have people watching the cultural center, the airport, the major transit hubs. You walked into my hotel by accident, but it's the safest place in Seoul for you right now. A pause. And I'm telling you about the records because you need to understand what they think you have and why they won't stop until they've... He paused. Until they've confirmed you don't have it. The way he'd paused before the end of that sentence. The word he'd chosen instead of the word he'd almost used. How long have you been watching me? Amara said. The clock ticked 3 times before he answered. 10 years. Taejun said. The floor seemed to shift slightly under her feet, though she was sitting. The scholarship, she said. For Juilliard. Yes. The medical settlement after the accident, the one that came through the insurance arbitration. That wasn't an insurance company. My apartment in New York. The building management that never raised my rent in 6 years. Yes. The surgery on my ear. When I lost partial hearing on the left side and there was a doctor in Baltimore who was supposedly covered by a grant, yes. Amara sat with it. 10 years. A decade of the scaffolding of her life. The supports that had allowed her to rebuild, to study, to perform, to survive. All of it tracing back to a man she'd never met, in a country she'd visited for the first time in a monsoon, 40 floors above a city that apparently wanted to kill her. Why? She said. The question was simple. She meant it simply. Taejun was quiet. My father made a promise to yours, he said, that whatever happened, you would be taken care of. Your father is dead. Yes. So the promise was yours to keep. Yes. She thought about asking him why he'd chosen to keep it. She thought about the complexity of that answer, the ways it would intersect with guilt and grief and the particular obligations that sons of powerful men carry like stones in their chests. She decided to leave it. The people looking for me, she said, they think I have access to financial records worth billions. Yes. And they'll try to take me to confirm or deny that. Yes. And you're going to keep that from happening. Yes. Why? A pause shorter than the others. Because I made a promise, he said. That's not the only reason, Amara said. The room was quiet for a long moment. No, Taejun said. It's not. Amara leaned back in the chair. She pressed her fingertips together. She thought about the cello downstairs in the Beck suite, which needed to acclimate to the temperature. She thought about the festival check-in she'd missed. She thought about her father carrying recordings of her performances to meetings with South Korean crime bosses, and those crime bosses keeping every one. She thought about the word mine in the lobby, and the weight it had carried, and the 10 years that had been compressed inside it. I'm not going to be kept here against my will, she said. No, Taejun agreed. If I want to leave, I leave. Yes. And if I stay, it's because I've decided it's tactically sound. Yes, she nodded once. Then I'll stay tonight, and tomorrow you'll tell me everything you know about the people who killed my father. A pause. Everything, he said, and the word had weight to it. Not a promise exactly. Something more specific than a promise. The acknowledgement of a debt that had been accruing for a decade and was finally, in a Seoul penthouse in the middle of a monsoon, coming due. Amara stood. She picked up her cane. One more thing, she said, turning in the direction of his voice. Yes. The scholarship committee letter said the funds came from a foundation, the Saebyok Foundation. She paused. In Korean, Saebyok means dawn. He didn't answer. My father used to wake me up early, she said. He called those hours the Saebyok hours. Said the best thinking happened before the world started making noise. A pause. He taught me that word when I was 7. The clock ticked. He told you that, she said. It wasn't a question. Taejun said nothing. Amara nodded to herself. A slow, private acknowledgement of something she was still too deep inside to fully name. Good night, she said, and walked back toward the elevator, her cane finding the path, her steps unhurried, while 40 stories below them the city drowned in the storm, and somewhere in the dark streets of Seoul, men who had killed her father were already moving. She did not know that one of them was already inside the hotel. She did not know that the man Taejun trusted most, the man he would leave in charge of her protection when the war for the Busan shipment called him away, had been feeding information to the other side for 4 months. She did not know any of this yet, but in 24 hours she would be standing over that man with a blade at his throat, and the man she'd walked away from tonight would come through the door expecting to find her in danger, and instead he would find something that would stop even him cold. She didn't sleep. She lay on the bed in the Beck suite with her shoes off and her jacket folded over the arm of the chair and her cane within reach of her right hand, and she did not sleep. The storm had eased sometime around 2 in the morning. She'd tracked it by the changing pitch of rain against the windows, the gradual de-escalation from wall of water to steady percussion to the thin intermittent tapping of a system running out of energy. By 3, it was mostly quiet. By 4, the city outside had the particular stillness of a place that had been beaten down and was waiting to see what daylight brought. Amara lay on her back with her hands folded on her stomach and thought. She thought about the scholarship letter, which she still had. She kept every document related to her education, organized in a system she'd built with her father before the accident. She thought about the specific language of it. Merit-based, anonymous donor, administered through the Saebyok Foundation, a registered nonprofit with a listed address in Seoul's Jongno district. She had looked up that address once, years ago, out of curiosity. It had turned out to be a law firm. She had not looked further. She thought about what it meant that she had not looked further. She thought about her father in rooms with men like the one upstairs. She tried to build the picture. Michael Brooks, with his northwestern tie and his good suits and his absolute refusal to let Amara see him frightened, sitting across a table from Kang Tae-jun's father, running numbers, building shells, understanding gradually what the shells were for and choosing what? To stay? To try to exit quietly? To protect something? She thought about the recordings. Crime bosses keeping recordings of a blind girl's cello recitals. She pressed her palms flat against the mattress and concentrated on the texture of the sheets until the heat behind her eyes receded. At 5:15, she heard the knock. 3 strikes even, the kind of knock that was performing respect rather than feeling it. She was upright and had the cane in her hand before the third one landed. "It's open," she said. The door opened. One set of footsteps. The security chief, Kim, whom she'd been cataloging since the lobby. He walked with a slight drag on the right heel. Old injury, probably a knee. He was trying not to limp and mostly succeeding. "He wants to see you before he leaves," Kim said. "Where's he going?" "That's for him to tell you." She stood and felt for her jacket. "Then let's not keep him waiting." Tae-jun was on the phone when she came in. She could tell by the one-sided quality of the silence, the way he was absorbing information rather than producing it, his breathing pattern short and controlled, the particular stillness of a body that is processing bad news and refusing to show it. She sat in the same chair as the night before and waited. The city outside the penthouse windows was doing what post-storm cities do, moving cautiously, reassessing damage, trying to determine what the flood had taken and what it had left behind. He ended the call. "The Busan situation is worse than I thought," he said, without preamble. "How much worse?" "The shipment they took, it wasn't random targeting. They had the exact route, the exact timing, and the specific cargo manifest. Someone inside gave them everything." He paused. "I'm leaving in an hour to manage it directly." Amara kept her face even. "And me. You stay here. The hotel is the safest location in Seoul for you right now. I have 40 men in this building, and I trust the infrastructure." A pause. "I'm leaving you with my captain. His name is Ryu Jae-won. He's been with me for 8 years. He will not let anything happen to you. You trust him." "Completely." She heard the absolute quality of that word, the way he said it without qualification, without the half-second hesitation that accompanied claims a person was calculating rather than knowing. He believed it, which meant whatever was wrong with Ryu Jae-won, Tae-jun hadn't seen it yet. She filed that. "There's something you should know," Tae-jun said, and his voice shifted into the register she'd already learned to identify as the one he used when he was releasing controlled information. "The people after you, the rival organization. Their name is the Cheongsan Group. They've been operating out of Busan for 15 years. The man who leads them is named Yoon Dae-seok. The same man behind the Busan shipment. Yes. So the shipment and me, they're connected. I believe the shipment attack was designed to pull me out of Seoul." A pause. "Which means they already knew you were here." The implication settled between them like something heavy being placed on a table. "There's a leak in your organization," Amara said. "Yes. Do you know who?" "Not yet. But you're leaving anyway." A silence. "I can't show them that I know the move was a feint. If I stay in Seoul while Busan burns, they'll understand that I've identified the strategy. I need them to believe it worked." "So you're playing along." "I'm managing the optics of a war," he said, "which sometimes requires doing things that look like weakness to protect something that looks like a target." He paused. "You'll be safe here." She wanted to say, "You don't know that." She didn't say it, because saying it would accomplish nothing except confirming to him that she understood the geometry of the situation, which she wasn't sure she wanted him to know she understood yet. Instead, she said, "Tell me about the Cheongsan Group, everything you know." He told her. It took 20 minutes. He was precise and unsentimental. Dates, names, operational structure, known assets. The Cheongsan Group had been founded by Yoon Dae-seok's older brother, who had died in a territorial dispute with the Hanul Syndicate in 2009. Yoon had taken over the operation and spent 15 years building it from a Busan-based street operation into something with international reach and a particular obsession with the financial records Amara's father had built. 3 attempts to recover the records in the years immediately following Michael Brooks's death. Then quiet for a decade. Not because they'd given up, but because they'd been patient. Because Yoon was patient, and because someone had finally given them a thread to pull. The cultural exchange application, Amara said. Your name, your location, and a connection to your father's work in Seoul. It was enough. Who leaked it? We're working on that. That's not an answer. No, he said. It isn't. She pressed her palms together. My father built the financial architecture, encrypted accounts, holding structures, asset trails across 6 countries. Yoon thinks I have access to that. Yes. Do you think I have access to that? A pause. I think your father was extremely careful, Taejun said, and extremely thorough, and that he loved you very much. And I think those 3 facts together imply something I haven't been able to confirm in 10 years of looking. She heard what he wasn't saying. She let it sit. Go to Busan, she said. Handle your war. He was quiet for a moment. Ryu will check on you every 2 hours, he said. The kitchen will bring whatever you want. Don't open the door for anyone who doesn't identify themselves by name. I've been managing my own safety for a long time, she said. I know that. I'm not asking for permission to exist in this room. I know that too. A pause, and something in his voice shifted into something she didn't have a category for yet. Something that was not apology and not instruction and not the careful management of a protected asset. Something more unguarded than any of that. I'm not good at this, he said. At what? He stopped. Started again. At caring about the outcome of something I can't control. Amara sat with that. That makes 2 of us, she said. She heard him move, the creak of his chair, the particular sound of a large man standing, then footsteps across the hardwood, then stopping. The recordings your father brought, but, he said from a point that her spatial sense put near the window. My father made me listen to everyone. I was 22. I thought it was ridiculous. Sitting in a room listening to a teenager play Bach on a cello. A pause. I was wrong about that. Which recording? She said. He told her. It was a Dvorak concerto, her junior recital at Northwestern before the accident. She had played it from memory, which her professor had told her was unnecessary and reckless, and she had done it anyway because she needed to understand whether she could trust her own mind under that kind of pressure. She had been 18. She had been terrified. She had played it without a single error. She had never told anyone about the fear. I listened to it 4 times, Taejun said. I was 22 and I had just done something I couldn't take back and I needed... He stopped. I needed something that wasn't what my life looked like that week. She didn't ask what he'd done. She thought she already understood the shape of it. Dvorak's good for that, she said. A silence that had something almost like levity in it. Almost. Then, I'll be back in 48 hours. And the footsteps moved, and the door opened, and he was gone. Amara sat in his penthouse for a long moment after he left. She pressed her fingertips together and listened to the city below and thought about 18-year-old Amara Brooks playing Dvorak in a concert hall, while a 22-year-old Korean crime boss sat in a room in Seoul and listened to a recording of it 4 times. She thought about all the ways the world connected people without telling them. Then she went back to the Beck suite and picked up her cello case. Ryu Chae-won came to check on her at 9. She had the cello out by then. The temperature had stabilized enough, and she needed something to do with her hands that wasn't pacing. She was running scales when he knocked. 3 strikes, harder than Kim's. The impatience of a man who considered this assignment beneath him and wasn't fully concealing it. Come in, she said, without stopping. He came in. She heard him take in the room, the small pause of a man recalibrating when he finds something other than what he expected. He'd expected, probably, a frightened woman sitting on a bed. He found a woman running cello scales in the center of the room with the posture of someone who was not frightened and had not recently been frightened and did not intend to become frightened on his schedule. Everything's secure, he said. His English was more heavily accented than Kim's, the vowels flatter. You need anything? I'm fine. Good. He was already turning to leave. How long have you worked for him? She said. The turning stopped. 8 years, he said. The answer came quickly. Too quickly, she thought, for a man who'd been asked a simple question by someone he considered irrelevant. Quick answers to simple questions could mean two things. Either the answer was automatic and genuine, or it was rehearsed. He trusts you completely, she said. Yes. That must be a significant responsibility. A pause. It's a job. She ran a long scale, her fingers finding the positions without thought. Funny word for it. Most people in his position don't call it a job. They call it loyalty. Same thing. Not really, she said. She stopped playing, turned in his general direction. Loyalty is something you feel. A job is something you do because the pay is sufficient. The silence had an edge to it now. Is there something you need? He said. His voice had cooled by approximately 10 degrees from where it had started. Just making conversation, Amara said. She set the cello down against the chair. I'll let you know if I need anything. He left. She sat and thought about the quality of that silence, the exact shape of his discomfort, the speed of the answer. She picked up the cello again. The second check-in was at 11. Different man this time. Younger, lighter footsteps. Nervous energy. He gave his name as Park Min-soo and stood in the doorway and asked if she needed food or water, and she said, "Coffee, please," and he left with the relief of someone glad to have a task. He came back 12 minutes later with coffee that was excellent, which told her something about the kitchen's standards and nothing at all about who was currently making decisions in this building. She'd been counting staff movements in the hallway, tracking the patterns of steps outside her door, building a map. The pattern had changed since Tae-jun left. Before his departure, there had been 2 men outside the door at all times. She'd confirmed this by the dual-weight sound when she'd pressed her ear briefly to the door at 6 a.m. Now there was one. She didn't know if that was a resource reallocation due to the Busan situation or something else. She was inclined to think something else. At noon, Ryu came back. He came in this time without knocking. She heard the door before it was fully open, the latch mechanism, then the hinge, and she had half a second to register that the usual courtesy knock was absent before he was inside the room. She stood from the chair where she'd been sitting, her hand finding the cello's neck without thinking. "We need to talk," he said. "You could have knocked." "We don't have time for—" He stopped, made a decision she could hear in the shift of his breathing. "How much did he tell you?" "About the records." She kept her face still. "Enough." "Did he tell you what they're worth?" "He mentioned billions." "He mentioned." Ryu said the word the way you say something that means the opposite of what it says. "Did he mention what happens to the first person who locates the access point? Not recovers the asset, locates the access point, and delivers that location to someone in a position to act on it?" Amara said nothing. "Because that person gets out," Ryu said, "whatever side they're on, whatever they've done. They get out clean, and they get a number that makes everything they've spent their life doing for other people irrelevant from that point forward." She heard it now, what she'd caught the edge of that morning. Not nerves, not impatience, calculation. "You've already made a deal," she said. The room was very quiet. "I need to know what you know," Ryu said. "I need to know if you have access to those records, or if this whole situation is based on a theory that doesn't hold. Because if you don't have anything, I can get you out of this building and somewhere safe before this gets complicated. And if you do have something, then what?" she said. "Then we work something out." "Work something out," she repeated. "With who?" A pause. "With the people who are going to find you eventually regardless," he said. "Better to be the one who brought them what they need than to be the thing they take it from." Amara stood very still. She could feel the weight of the room shifting, the specific gravity of a situation crossing a threshold it couldn't cross back over. She thought about the blade in her cane. She thought about the distance between them, 8 feet, maybe 9. She thought about what her father had told her in the basement of their Hyde Park house when she was 16. When he'd begun the training he'd never once explained, and she'd never once questioned because the seriousness in his voice had always been sufficient reason. She thought, he knew this day might come. He was preparing me for a version of this day. "I don't have access to any records," she said. "I don't believe that." "That's your right." "Amara." He said her name the way people say a name when they want to reframe the relationship, when they want to suggest that the use of your name constitutes intimacy. "I'm trying to help you." "No," she said. You're trying to help yourself, which I understand, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't make it sound like something else. His breathing changed. Something tightened in it. I've already called them, he said. They're 20 minutes out. If you work with me, I can make this simple. If you don't, then you've already made your decision, she said. Which means this conversation was never actually a choice for me. A pause. Then, I'm sorry. No, you're not, she said. But it doesn't matter. She heard him reach for something at his side. The whisper of fabric against a holster. She heard his weight shift forward. She heard everything she needed to hear in the 2 seconds before he moved, and the training that her father had built into her over 3 years of basement sessions that she'd never understood the reason for, until exactly this moment unfolded in her body, not as thought, but as pure, cold, automatic response. She moved left, hard, 1 step, putting the chair between them. Her right hand found the base of her cane, her thumb found the release mechanism, a small lever, custom installed, that her father had shown her once and made her practice until she could find it in absolute darkness in under a second. The lower section of the cane separated from the upper. 12 inches of rigid carbon fiber with a blade at one end, 3 inches, fixed. The edge maintained every 6 months, whether she thought she would need it or not. Ryu was faster than she'd expected. He closed the distance before she'd fully cleared the chair, and his hand found her left arm. A grip designed to control and restrain rather than to immediately harm, which meant he still wanted something from her. She let him have the arm. She used the direction of his pull to accelerate her own movement, turning into him instead of away, and in the compressed space of a body width, she drove the point of the blade into the soft tissue of his forearm. Not deep, not designed to be, designed to make him release the arm. He released the arm. He swore. A single word, Korean, the specific word that meant pain had overridden decision-making, and stepped back, and she used those 2 steps to put the bed between them. He had a gun. She'd heard the holster. He hadn't drawn it, which meant he needed her mobile and cooperative. That was the only advantage she had, and it was a narrow one. You're going to want to reconsider whatever comes next, she said. Her voice was level. Her heart was doing something percussive and unpleasant against her sternum. She controlled it. Because I'm more useful to you whole, and I am significantly less easy to manage than you expected, and in approximately 35 minutes, Kang Tai-jun is going to want to know why his captain is bleeding in a hotel suite. He's in Busan, Ryu said. His voice had changed. The calculation was still there, but it was recalculating now, adjusting for variables that hadn't been in the original model. You think he'll stay in Busan when his hotel goes dark? She said. You think a man like that doesn't have a dead man switch on this building? The moment your people come through that lobby, something trips. He knows within minutes. Silence. You should have thought this through better, she said. You're smart enough to see the angle, but you didn't play it out far enough. Shut up, he said. No. The sound of him breathing, ragged now, the arm bothering him more than he wanted to show. She heard him shift his weight, heard the decision happening in real time. He moved for the door, locked it from the inside. The bolt slid home with a sound like a small gun being cocked. They'll be here in 15 minutes, he said. Not 20. I adjusted the timeline when I came in here. A pause. I'm sorry this is how it has to go. You keep saying you're sorry, Amara said. I mean it. I know, she said. That's the worst part about you. She stood behind the bed with the blade in her hand and listened to him breathe, and thought about her father in a car on a highway in the dark, and the 3 seconds between the headlights of an oncoming truck and the end of everything, and whether he'd been afraid. She decided he hadn't been. She decided that was the inheritance he'd left her that mattered more than any encoded financial record. This particular quality of stillness in the middle of the worst possible moment, this refusal to let fear be the last thing. Ryu crossed to the window. She tracked him by sound. There's nowhere for you to go, he said. He was looking out at the city, she thought. Even if you get past me, the lobby's controlled, the exits are covered. I'm not trying to go anywhere, she said. Then what are you doing? Waiting, she said. For what? For you to make the last mistake, she said. The city hummed 40 floors below. The storm was completely gone now. Seoul in the morning light was all glass and movement. A city that had been flooded and was already deciding it hadn't been. Ryu turned from the window, and in the space between his turn and his next step, Amara Brooks stopped waiting and she moved, not away from him, toward him. That was the part Ryu hadn't modeled, that a blind woman in a locked room with a blade would close distance instead of retreating from it. Every instinct he had, built from 8 years in a world where the person with the weapon controlled the space, told him that a cornered target backed into walls and begged. He had built his entire approach around a woman who would back into walls. Amara came at him low and fast, her left shoulder dropping, her right hand leading with the blade angled up, and she used the sound of his breathing as a targeting system with a precision that would have been frightening to watch. She hit him before he fully processed that she was moving, her shoulder into his solar plexus, the blade scoring across his gun hand when he tried to raise it. And then she was past him, and the gun was on the floor, and she was between him and it, and she still had the blade. Ryu gasped. The solar plexus hit had compressed his diaphragm, and he couldn't speak for 3 seconds, which was enough. She put the tip of the blade against the side of his neck. "Hands where I can hear them," she said. "Flat on the wall." He put his hands on the wall. She could feel his pulse against the blade tip. Elevated, rapid, the pulse of a man whose plan had just catastrophically departed from its projected trajectory. His breath was coming back, ragged and controlled in the way of someone trying to recover without showing how badly they'd been hit. "The gun," she said. "Kick it toward the window, away from the door." A pause. She pressed the blade fractionally harder. He kicked the gun. She tracked it by sound, the slide of metal across hardwood, the soft stop as it hit the baseboard near the window. "How many are coming?" she said. "4? Armed." "Yes." ETA. 12 minutes now. She breathed through her nose. 12 minutes. She could work with 12 minutes if she thought precisely and moved fast and didn't let the adrenaline push her into decisions that felt urgent but weren't sound. Her father's voice in her head, from the basement sessions. Adrenaline is information. It tells you the stakes. It is not a navigation system. Don't let it drive. "Taejun," she said, "how do I reach him directly?" "You can't. He'll be in the logistics meeting in Busan. His direct line, not through the hotel system. His personal number." "I don't—" She shifted the blade. "His personal number," she said again. Ryu recited it. She memorized it in the way she memorized everything. Not by repetition, but by relationship, connecting the digits to patterns, to intervals, to the way a sequence of numbers had a shape the same way a sequence of notes had a shape. She had it permanently in under 4 seconds. "If those 4 men come through the lobby, people die," she said. "Your people, the hotel staff, possibly guests. That's on you whether or not I'm standing here." "I understand that," Ryu said, and the flatness in his voice told her that he had understood it before he'd made the call, and had made it anyway. Which told her something important about how much he needed out, how deep whatever hole he was in had gotten. She filed that too. "Move to the bathroom," she said. "Slowly." "What?" "Slowly," she repeated. He moved slowly. She stayed behind him with the blade between his shoulder blades, reading his balance, feeling for any decision to turn. He didn't turn. She walked him into the bathroom and closed the door between them. There was no lock on the bathroom door from the outside, so she jammed the blade through the door handle and into the frame at an angle that would hold it for approximately 3 minutes, against a man who wasn't panicking. It would have to be enough. She moved back to the main room. She found the gun by the baseboard, a compact semi-automatic, she identified by shape and weight as she picked it up. She checked the chamber by feel, loaded, one in the pipe. She put it in her jacket pocket and picked up her cane, the separated pieces, and reconnected them, the upper and lower sections clicking back into their latched position. Then she picked up the room's landline. She dialed the front desk. "This is the guest in the Beck suite," she said. "I need you to do something, and I need you to do it in the next 90 seconds. Do not connect me to security. Listen to me." The desk clerk, young, female, the vocal quality of someone very carefully not showing that she was alarmed by this call, said, "Of course. How can I evacuate the lobby? All staff, whatever guests are present, tell them there's a gas leak. Tell them whatever gets them outside. You have 60 seconds. A sharp intake of breath. Ma'am, I don't have the authority to—" "You have the authority to make a decision right now that keeps people from getting hurt," Amara said. "That's the only authority that matters. Do it." She hung up. She moved to the door, pressed her ear against it. One set of footsteps in the hallway. The single guard Ryu had left. The resource reallocation she'd noted this morning. One man. She could work with one man. She knocked on the door from the inside. 3 times, evenly spaced. The way Ryu had knocked. A pause. Then the guard's voice, muffled. "Captain?" She knocked again. The same pattern. The latch turned. The door opened. She smelled him before she heard his surprise, sweat and gun oil, and the particular chemical note of the earpiece transmitter in his left ear. She was moving before the surprise fully registered on his face, her elbow finding his chin in an upward arc, her weight behind it, and he went back against the hallway wall, and she caught him before he hit the floor because the last thing she needed was the sound of a body going down in a hotel corridor. She lowered him carefully. He was breathing. He would have a significant headache and probably a loose tooth. He would live. She felt for his earpiece and took it, put it in her own left ear, static. Then voices, 2 of them, speaking Korean in the clipped, task-focused shorthand of men moving toward an objective. She moved toward the stairwell. She went up, not down. Down was where they were coming from. Down was the lobby and the 4 armed men with a 12-minute window that had now shrunk to probably 8. Up was the roof access and a clear signal, and the phone number she'd memorized pressing against the inside of her skull like something with a temperature. The stairwell door was heavy, and she held it so it closed without a sound behind her. The acoustics changed immediately. Cement and steel, the city's ambient noise coming up through the structure like something living, the particular resonance of a tall building's core. She took the stairs at a controlled run, her right hand trailing the railing, her feet finding each step by the pressure feedback of the previous one. 2 floors up, roof access door, locked, keypad. She put her ear to it, heard the mechanism. Electronic lock, the kind with a 4-digit code and a bypass for fire safety. There was always a bypass. Building codes required it. A physical override behind a small panel to the right of the main pad. She found the panel by touch. A recessed tab. She pressed it and held it for 3 seconds. The lock disengaged. She pushed through into the wind. Seoul opened up around her. Not visually, never visually, but in every other dimension of the word. The city's sound signature expanded to its full scale. Traffic from 42 floors below. The distant moan of a garbage truck, somewhere northeast a helicopter that was probably traffic reporting. The specific acoustic texture of a city of 10 million people going about a post-storm Tuesday morning. The wind was from the west, carrying humidity and the faint mineral smell of the Han River. The sun was up. She could feel its heat on her left cheek, which oriented her. South was behind her, north was ahead. She moved away from the door and dialed Tae-jun. It rang twice. "Who is this?" he said. Not a number he recognized. His voice was completely flat. The voice of a man who was already in the middle of something and had answered an unknown call, because in his world, unknown calls sometimes contain things you needed to know immediately. "It's Amara," she said. A pause. Short but absolute. The kind that meant recalibration was happening. "Where are you?" he said. "Roof. Hotel roof." "Your captain made a call, Tae-jun. He has 4 men coming into the building right now and he's locked in my bathroom with a blade in the door handle. I have approximately 6 minutes. The silence on his end lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Kim," he said, not to her. She heard him shifting, addressing someone in the room with him. "Lock down the Hanseong, full protocol. Nobody in or out." Then back to her. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Where's Ryu?" "Bathroom, 2nd floor." "He told them you were there." "He told them yes. He also suggested we work something out, which I declined." A pause. "He's scared of something beyond you. I don't know what yet. Whatever hole he's in, it was deep enough to make burning 8 years of loyalty feel like a reasonable option." She heard Tae-jun breathing, the specific quality of a man absorbing an enormous betrayal and refusing to perform the feeling of it. "I'm 40 minutes out," he said. "I know." "Can you hold?" "I'm on your roof with a borrowed gun and a cello blade," she said. "Define hold." Another pause. Something moved through the line, not quite a sound, more the impression of one. She thought strangely of Dvorak. "Full lockdown will seal the lobby entrances," he said. Steel barriers, the system takes 90 seconds to cycle. If those men aren't inside the building before it trips, they won't get in. And if they're already inside, then my men on the lower floors engage them. How many of your men are still in the building? A pause. Kim is running an accurate count right now, he said, which meant not enough. Which meant Ryu had done more than make a phone call. Ryu had been redistributing assets. The shipment attack in Busan, she said, that was designed to pull you out. Yes. Which means Ryu told them your schedule. He told them when you'd be gone and for how long. Yes. Taejun. She stopped, felt the wind on her face, felt the city below her, vast and indifferent and full of people who had no idea what was happening 42 floors above their heads. There's something I need to tell you about the records, about what my father did with them. A silence. Tell me, he said. Not over the phone, she said. When you get back. But I need you to understand that whatever Yoon's people think I have, they're not entirely wrong. My father was thorough. He was careful, and he was very, very specific about what he taught me and why. She paused. I've been trying to not know what I know for 10 years. I think that time is finished. The line was quiet for a long moment. Amara, he said. I'm fine, she said. Go faster. She ended the call. In the earpiece, the two voices had gone quiet. That was worse than movement. Silence from trained men meant they'd achieved a position and were waiting for something. She stood on the roof and thought about the geometry of the building below her. 42 floors, one stairwell she'd come up, the elevator shafts, the mechanical room to her right, which she could tell from the vibration through the roof membrane was running, which meant the building's systems were active. Then she heard the lockdown. A low mechanical thrum transmitted through the building's structure. The steel barriers cycling down. The sound of large electromagnetic locks engaging throughout the lobby level. The particular bass note of security infrastructure doing what it was built to do. 90 seconds, Taejun had said. She counted them on her pulse. At 83, the voices in the earpiece suddenly spiked. Barriers down. We're blocked. Service entrance. Covered. There's a static. Then, one of them's inside. Chang is inside. He was already... The earpiece cut out. She stood in the wind and understood what that meant. One of Yoon's 4 men had already been inside the building before the lockdown cycled, which meant the geometry she'd been working with was wrong. She'd been thinking about them coming in. She hadn't sufficiently considered that one of them was already in, had come in earlier, maybe last night, maybe disguised as staff, maybe with Ryu's help in a way that didn't show up on the lobby records. One man. Inside. Moving toward a position. Not toward her. She was on the roof, and nobody had seen her come up. Toward Ryu. She understood in the same instant they needed Ryu mobile. Ryu was the inside man, the one who could move freely through the building. With Ryu locked in a bathroom and Amara unaccounted for, the plan had fractured, and the man already inside was going to recover the piece they needed most. She went back through the roof door. Oshab. She came down the stairs fast, her hand on the rail, counting floors by the door handles she brushed with her fingertips as she passed them. 3rd floor, then 2nd. She hit the landing and pushed through the stairwell door before she'd finished decelerating, and she was in the corridor before she'd fully assessed what she was walking into. She heard him. He was already at the Baek suite door. She could tell by the position of the sounds, the specific interference pattern of someone working a door handle, not forcing it, opening it with a key card. Ryu had given him a key card, or Ryu had given him the override code, or Ryu had done this in advance, and she'd sat in this room for hours without knowing the door could open from the outside, regardless of what she did. The blade came out. She moved down the corridor at a controlled pace, her left hand on the wall for orientation, counting doorways. The man at the suite door was focused on the door. She could hear his weight distribution, slightly forward, left shoulder toward the frame, a posture that said he was going in first and fast, and expected something specific on the other side. He didn't expect her behind him. She hit the corridor's acoustic inflection point, the spot where her footsteps would become audible to him, at 6 feet of distance, and he heard her at the same moment she reached for him, and the next 4 seconds were the most technically demanding of her life. He was bigger than Ryu. She read that in the first contact. His arm mass when she caught his right wrist, the shoulder height when he turned and drove his elbow back. She went under it, which cost her the wrist control, and she took a glancing blow across her left cheekbone that lit up her vision in the specific way of head impacts. White fire behind the eyes, the brain registering damage. She didn't go down. She found the wall and used it, pushing off it to change her angle. And she came in close the way her father had taught her. When you can't see, close distance. In a fight where you can't use your eyes, distance is your enemy. Close distance, use your hands, make the space so small the other person can't swing. She drove the blade into his thigh. Deep this time. Not the scoring cut she'd used on Ryu. She felt it go in, the specific resistance of muscle tissue, the pop of the fascia layer, the way his body tried to move away from the pain and couldn't because she had his weight direction and was moving with it. He went down. She pulled the blade back and stepped away and stood against the wall with her chest heaving and blood from the cheekbone running down her face and the blade in her right hand and the gun in her left. He was on the floor. Not dead. His breathing was the breathing of someone in significant pain managing a significant injury, working the arithmetic of whether to keep trying or to recalculate. He kept trying. She heard him reach for something. "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Slide whatever that is away from you," she said. A pause. Then the sound of something hard crossing the corridor floor. She breathed. 1, 2, 3, 4. In. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out. The cheekbone was going to bruise badly. The skin hadn't broken, but the impact had been hard enough to cause tissue damage she'd be feeling for a week. She ignored it the way she ignored all physical information that was urgent, but not immediately operational. The bathroom door. She moved to it. The blade was still jammed in the handle where she'd left it. The man on the floor had apparently been coming for Ryu first, to release him, and she'd intercepted before he'd reached it. She pulled the blade free and held the door closed and thought very quickly. Ryu was behind this door. Ryu, who had called in armed men, who had arranged the initial leak, who had spent 4 months feeding information about Taejun's operations to people who wanted Amara dead. Ryu, who was also frightened of something specific, and had been for long enough to make terrible decisions seem reasonable. She thought about what her father would do. Her father had spent years in rooms with dangerous men. He had not survived by being the most dangerous person in the room. He had survived by being the most useful. She opened the bathroom door. Ryu was sitting on the tile floor with his back against the bathtub and his injured arm held against his chest. He looked up. She couldn't see it, but she could feel the shift of attention, the way his breathing changed when the door opened. "The man who came in," she said. "Is there anyone else?" A pause. "One more," he said. His voice had changed. The architecture of it had changed. The calculation had collapsed, and what was underneath it was something exhausted and raw and afraid in a way that calculation had been working very hard to hide. "The other two are locked out. Chang and—" He stopped. "It's over, isn't it?" "How much did you give them?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. "Ryu." Her voice was flat. "I have a man bleeding in the corridor, and 40 minutes until your boss walks through the lobby. I need to understand the shape of this before he gets here." A long silence. "Everything," he said. "For 4 months. Shipment routes, timing, personnel movements. The Busan attack was built from my information." He paused. "My daughter. Yoon's people found out about my daughter, and they told me what would happen to her if I didn't." He stopped. His breathing broke apart at the edges. "She's 14. Amara stood in the bathroom doorway. She held the geometry of it in her mind. A man who had built 8 years of genuine loyalty inside a criminal organization, who had a daughter he'd kept entirely separate from that life, who had been found anyway, who had spent 4 months betraying everything he'd built because the alternative was a 14-year-old girl. She thought about her father. She thought about the specific shape of the love that does terrible things to keep you safe. "Where is she?" Amara said. "Daegu. With her mother. They're— I have them in an apartment. I paid for it separately. Cash. No. Yoon's people found them anyway. 3 months ago." His voice was the voice of a man saying a thing he hadn't said out loud before. "They sent me a photograph of her walking to school, her backpack. The specific time." He exhaled. "You understand what that means?" "Yes," Amara said. I understand what that means. She stood there for a moment. Tell me the name of your contact in the Chongsan group, she said. The person you report to. He told her. Tell me where Yoon bases his Seoul operations. He told her that too. She stepped back from the doorway. She felt the weight of the gun in her left hand and the blade in her right hand, and the bruise building across her cheekbone, and the sound of the wounded man in the corridor beginning to drag himself toward the wall. She felt, underneath all of it, the specific shape of what she had been carrying for 10 years without knowing what it was. Her father had encoded the financial records in music. He had put everything, every account number, every transaction, every asset trail across 6 countries, into a composition that existed nowhere except inside Amara's memory. She had been playing pieces of it her entire adult life without understanding what they were. The Dvorak she'd played at her Northwestern recital. It wasn't Dvorak. The intervals were wrong in ways she'd never been able to fully articulate, and she'd told herself it was her professor's idiosyncratic interpretation, and she'd memorized his version and performed it and carried it since. It wasn't Dvorak. It had never been Dvorak. Her father had been a genius of a kind she hadn't had the information to recognize. He had looked at his daughter's extraordinary musical memory and done the most careful, the most loving, and the most dangerous thing a man in his position could do. He had made her the key. He had made her the entire ledger. And now, in a Seoul hotel corridor with blood on her face and 2 enemies in various states of incapacitation around her, Amara Brooks finally understood why the training had happened. Why the basement sessions, why the blade in the cane, why he'd spent 3 years making her dangerous. He'd known what she was carrying. He'd known they would come for it eventually. He'd spent 3 years trying to make sure she would still be alive when they did. She pressed her back against the corridor wall and tilted her face up and breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, and felt the enormity of it move through her like a wave moving through deep water. Not breaking. Moving. Then she straightened. Then she looked sightlessly down the corridor where the wounded man had stopped dragging himself and was watching her with the particular wariness of someone who had revised his threat assessment several times in the last 5 minutes and was still arriving at numbers he didn't like. "Don't move," she said. He didn't move. She dialed Taejun. He picked up on the first ring. "Tell me," he said. "I need you to do 3 things before you get here," she said. "First, there's a 14-year-old girl in Daegu named..." She looked back at the bathroom doorway. "What's her name?" Ryu's voice came rough and quiet. "Soo-yeon." "Named Soo-yeon. Ryu's daughter. She and her mother need to be moved immediately. Somewhere Yoon's people can't reach. Can you do that?" A pause of exactly 1 second. "Yes," he said. "Second, the wounded man in the corridor of the 19th floor. He needs medical attention. I'd prefer he survive because he may have information." "Noted." "Third," she stopped, breathed. "Third, when you get back, I need to play you something, a piece of music, and you need to listen very carefully because I'm starting to understand that everything your father and my father and 10 years of people trying to kill me has been building toward is sitting inside my head, and I've been carrying it since I was 19 years old, and I didn't know it." The line was silent. "Taejun." "I'm here," he said. "Drive faster," she said. She ended the call. She stood in the corridor of the Hanseong Imperial Hotel, 42 floors above Seoul, with a blade in one hand and a gun in the other, and a bruise darkening across her left cheekbone. And she finally let herself feel the full weight of what her father had done. The love of it, and the burden of it, and the extraordinary, terrible trust of it, encoding everything in the one thing he knew she would carry forever. The one thing no one could take from her because it lived not in a vault or a drive or a document, but in the deep architecture of her memory, in the place where music. She was still standing in the corridor when the elevator opened. She had the gun up before the doors had finished parting. Both hands, weight forward, the way her father had taught her in the basement with a trainer's pistol and paper targets she couldn't see but could locate by the sound of the paper moving in the building's ventilation. She had the position triangulated by the elevator's mechanical signature, the specific ping of this shaft versus the service shaft 20 feet to her left, and she was aimed at center mass before the first footstep crossed the threshold. "It's Kim," the security chief said. Fast, flat. The voice of a man who understood immediately that announcing himself was a survival priority. She lowered the gun 2 inches, but didn't put it away. "How many in the lobby?" she said. "Two of Yoon's men blocked outside the barriers. One neutralized on the ground floor. My team found him when the lockdown cycled." He was moving toward her as he spoke, assessing the corridor. She could hear the slight change in his breathing when he registered the man on the floor near the wall, the blood, the bathroom doorway. "You did this." "The man by the wall needs a surgeon," she said. "Thigh wound. He's been cooperative." Kim was quiet for a half-second, the silence of a man recalibrating what he thought he knew about the woman he had walked to a hotel suite 12 hours ago. "And Ryu," he said. "Bathroom. He's going to tell you everything. He'll cooperate fully." She paused. "His daughter is in Daegu. Taejun is handling the relocation." Another silence. "You called him directly," Kim said. "Yes. He gave you his personal number. This morning, before he left." She lowered the gun fully. "How long until he gets here?" 30 minutes. He's pushing." A pause, and something shifted in Kim's voice. Not softness, exactly, but an adjustment. A senior man in a violent organization recalibrating his working model of a situation. "Are you hurt?" "Cheekbone. It'll hold." She turned toward the stairwell door. "I need the penthouse." "The penthouse is—" "I need a piano," she said, "or a keyboard. Something with full range. Whatever's in the building." Kim was quiet. "There's a Steinway in the penthouse," he said. "Taejun's father had it brought up. He doesn't play." "I know," she said. "Get me up there." The Steinway was in the corner of the main room near the north-facing windows. She found it by the smell first. Old wood, felt, the particular mineral scent of piano wire under tension. Then by the acoustic shadow it cast, the way the room's reverb pattern had a gap in it near the north wall. She crossed to it and sat on the bench and placed her hands on the keys and felt the action. A good instrument, well maintained, the keys weighted correctly, the action smooth but not soft. Someone had been playing it. Recently. The bench height was set for someone taller than her. She adjusted it. Kim stood somewhere behind her. She could hear him breathing, hear the slight shift of his weight every 40 seconds. A man standing at attention out of habit, watching something he hadn't been briefed to expect. "Don't record this," she said. I mean it. Whatever you're thinking about doing with your phone, don't." A pause. "Understood." She put her hands on the keys. She started with the piece she'd called Dvorak for 10 years. It began the way it always began. A cello line in D minor, the first 8 bars conventional enough that any trained ear would hear Dvorak's fingerprints on it. She'd played it 100 times. She'd taught herself to play it on piano for the occasions when she wanted to hear it whole rather than fragmentary. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. Now she played it, and she listened differently. She'd been trained her entire adult life to perform music, to interpret it, to render it as emotional communication. She had never been trained to parse it as a data structure, because she hadn't known that was what it was. But the knowledge that her father had encoded something inside it changed the way she heard the intervals, changed the way she felt the relationships between notes. The piece was approximately 40 minutes long in full performance. She didn't play it full. She played the first movement, and then she stopped, and she sat with her hands still on the keys and let the reverb die out, and she began the slow, methodical work of separating what was music from what was information. Her father had been meticulous. That was the word for it. Meticulous in the specific way of a man who understood that the thing he was building would need to be recovered under pressure by someone who had never been told it was there, and who had to discover its structure from the inside. He hadn't hidden the data crudely. He hadn't simply substituted numbers for notes. He'd done something far more elegant and far harder to detect. He'd built the data into the harmonic relationships between voices, the intervals between the cello line and the piano counter melody, the specific chromatic deviations that a performer would interpret as expressive choice and that were in fact precise, account numbers in the intervals, transaction codes in the rhythmic patterns, the holding structure of the entire operation encoded in the architectural relationships between movements. She played it again, slower. By the third pass, she had the structure. By the fourth, she was reading it. She sat back and pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed through the enormity of it. 6 countries, 47 holding entities, transaction records going back 19 years, the complete financial infrastructure of everything the Hanuel Syndicate had built, everything its rivals had stolen, everything that had been hidden and moved and layered behind shell companies and nominee directors across half the financial architecture of Asia. And inside that structure, like a name carved into stone, the signature of the people who had arranged her father's death. Not just Yoon Dae-seok's organization, not just the Cheongsan Group, someone inside the Hanuel Syndicate itself, someone who had been there from the beginning. She sat very still with that knowledge. Then she heard the elevator. Ikot. Taejun came through the penthouse door at a pace that was controlled but only just. The walk of a man who had driven 40 minutes of highway in 30 and was currently managing the output of that on pure discipline. She heard him take in the room, the piano, her on the bench, Kim standing near the window. "You're bleeding," he said. He was across the room before she'd fully registered his movement, and then he was crouching in front of her and she could feel the heat of him at close range, the specific intensity of someone whose adrenaline hadn't fully metabolized. "It stopped," she said. "Let me, Taejun." Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him. "Sit down. I need you to listen to something, and I need you to be sitting when you hear it." A pause. Then the sound of him pulling a chair from somewhere and sitting in it, close. 3 feet, maybe less. She could hear his breathing, fast still, coming down. "The records are real," she said. "I have them. All of them. They've been in my head since I was 19 years old, and I didn't know what they were." She paused. "My father encoded the entire financial architecture of the Hanuel Syndicate's operations into a piece of music. He taught it to me as Dvorak. It isn't Dvorak. Every interval, every chromatic deviation, every rhythmic pattern, it's data, account numbers, transaction codes, asset trails, the complete record of everything." The room was silent except for the city 40 floors below. "Everything," Taejun said. "Everything, including—" She stopped, felt the edge of what she was about to say. "Including the identity of the person who sold my father's location to the Cheongsan Group in 2015, the person inside the Hanuel Syndicate who gave Yoon the information he needed to stage the accident." She heard Taejun go absolutely still. "It's in the records," she said. "My father encoded it specifically. He knew who it was before he died, and he couldn't prove it any other way, so he put it in the only place he knew would survive." "Tell me the name," Taejun said. His voice had dropped to something she hadn't heard from him before. Not anger, not the cold executive register he used for operational decisions. Something older and quieter and far more dangerous. She told him. The silence that followed lasted 7 seconds. She counted them. "He's been with the organization for 22 years, Taejun said. His voice was completely level. "Yes." "He was at my father's funeral." "Yes." "He ran the internal investigation into your father's death." "Yes." "Which is why the investigation found nothing." 7 more seconds of silence. "Where is he now?" Taejun said, Kim's voice from across the room. "Chungmu office. He went there this morning when you went to Busan? I thought—" A pause. "I thought it was routine." "It wasn't routine," Taejun said. "No," Kim said. Taejun stood. She heard it in the shift of air pressure and the sound of the chair moving back. She heard him walk to the window. The specific weight of his tread when he was thinking versus when he was moving with purpose. He stood at the window for a long moment. "You know she's here," he said. "Ryu confirmed the timeline?" 4 months, Amara said. "The cultural exchange application leak was 3 months ago. Ryu had been feeding them operational intelligence for a month before that. Which means Yoon has been building toward this for 3 months minimum." He turned from the window. "He's not going to stop at 2 men in a hotel. He knows the hotel failed. He knows his inside man is compromised. His next move is—" His phone rang. He looked at it. Something crossed his face. She couldn't see it, but she heard it in the fractional change of his breathing. The half-second before he answered, that meant the caller ID had told him something significant. He answered. "Yoon," he said. The name landed in the room like a dropped weapon. She heard the voice on the other end. She couldn't make out words at this distance, but she could hear the tone, measured, the voice of a man who had spent his life performing patience and had gotten very good at it. Taejun listened. His breathing stayed even. His body, from what she could read acoustically, stayed very still. Then he said, "No." A pause. More from the other end. "No," Taejun said again. Then, "If you touch her, I will burn everything you've built to the foundation, and I will do it personally." He ended the call. "He has the Chungmu office surrounded," Kim said, and she realized Kim had been on a separate line for the last 30 seconds, running parallel information. The asset there, Song, is currently with 6 men from Yoon's organization. They're holding the office and they're holding Song. "Song is the man," Amara said, "the one from the records." "Yes," Taejun said. "Yoon is using him as leverage," she said. "He wants the records in exchange for Song's life." She paused. "He thinks you'll care about Song." "I cared about Song for 22 years, Taejun said. "What he actually has is a man who sold my father's trusted employee to his death and then spent a decade pretending to grieve the outcome." His voice was completely flat. "Yoon has made a significant miscalculation." "He's made 2, Amara said. "What's the second?" "He thinks the records are something I can hand over. A drive, a document, something physical. He doesn't know yet that they exist only in my memory." She paused. "Which means his entire strategy is built on a premise that doesn't exist." Taejun was quiet for a moment. "He'll figure that out," he said. "And when he does, the leverage calculation changes. He doesn't need the records from you. He needs to make sure you can't give them to anyone else." The implication sat between them. "We need to move fast," Kim said. "We need to move now," Taejun said. The Chungmu office was 20 minutes from the hotel in normal traffic. They made it in 11. Amara was in the second vehicle. Kim had tried to argue that she should stay at the hotel, and Taejun had looked at him for exactly 1 second before Kim had stopped arguing. She sat in the back seat with her cane between her knees and the gun in her jacket pocket, and she tracked the route by the turns and the traffic noise and the gradual change in the city's acoustic signature as they moved from Gangnam toward the older commercial district, where the Hanoil Syndicate maintained its public face as a legitimate holdings company. Taejun was in the front vehicle. She could hear his voice occasionally through the open channel on Kim's radio. Short, precise instructions, the operational language of a man who had run situations like this before and had stripped everything unnecessary from his communication a long time ago. "North entrance is covered," Kim said into the radio. "They have a man on the roof of the building across the street. Sniper position." "Noted," Taejun's voice said. "Come in from the Ulji side. Basement access." "Basement access requires the card Song carries," Kim said. A pause. "Song is inside," Taejun said, "which means his card is inside, which means we go through the front." The vehicle stopped. She got out before Kim could come around to assist her, her feet finding the pavement, her cane out and reading the surface. She built the space immediately, a street, moderate width, commercial buildings on both sides, foot traffic sparse. Mid-morning, wrong part of the district for heavy pedestrian flow. Ahead of her, the acoustic signature of a building entrance, glass doors probably, the specific way sound compressed slightly near large glass surfaces. Taejun was beside her. She hadn't heard him approach, which she filed as important information about how he moved when he was focused. "Stay close," he said, low, for her only. "I'm not going to stay behind you," she said. "I know." A pause. "Stay close." They went in. The lobby of the Chungmu office was empty. She knew it was empty because the acoustic signature was wrong. Too much echo, the kind of space that was built for occupancy and had none. No ambient conversation, no keyboard noise, no ventilation hum of a building running at capacity. Just the deep, held silence of a place where the people were all in one location, and that location was somewhere else in the building. "4th floor," Kim said quietly, reading something. A phone screen, probably, tracking positions. "They've consolidated. All 6 of Yoon's men and Song in the main conference room." "Exits from the conference room," Taejun said. "One door, no secondary access. They've boxed themselves." "Or they want us to come to them," Kim said. "Same thing," Taejun said. Either way, we go up. She moved with them to the stairwell. She had the gun out now, safety off, her right hand on the grip and her left hand on the stairwell railing. She counted floors. 1, 2, 3. At the third floor landing, Tae-jun's hand found her arm. Not restraining, just a brief contact, the kind that communicated, "Here, this position, wait." She stopped. She heard him and two of his men continue up. She stood on the third floor landing and breathed and listened. The sounds from above were compressed through the stairwell ceiling. Movement, weight shifting, then a voice she didn't recognize saying something in Korean, and Tae-jun's voice answering it, and then a long silence that had the specific pressure of men deciding whether to do something irreversible. Then a sound she hadn't expected. Footsteps below her, coming up, fast. She turned and put her back to the wall and raised the gun. 2 sets. Moving quickly, not trying to be quiet, which meant either they were Tae-jun's people she hadn't been briefed on, or they were Yoon's, and they'd come in through a route nobody had covered. She waited until the footsteps were 1 floor below and called out, "Identify." A pause. "Park," a voice said. "Kim's man." "Park Min-soo." She lowered the gun. "There's a problem," Park said, arriving at her landing, slightly winded. "Yoon isn't at the Busan operation. He's here. His car was spotted 3 blocks east 6 minutes ago." She processed this quickly. Yoon in Seoul. Yoon, who had orchestrated this entire operation from a distance, who had been patient for 15 years and had finally moved his pieces into place, was here personally. "He came for the endgame himself," she said. "Yes." She was already moving up the stairs. The 4th floor corridor was bright. She felt the change in temperature, the specific warmth of a well-lit space, the ventilation running at higher capacity than the floors below. Tae-jun and his men were positioned outside the conference room door. She could hear the standoff through the door itself. A voice inside, Korean, older, the specific cadence of a man who had been speaking in command registers so long his voice had settled into it permanently. Song. She heard Song's voice, saying something to the men holding him, something short and very still. Then Yoon's voice on a phone, Tae-jun's phone, she realized, they were doing this by call, measured and patient and almost bored. She moved to Tae-jun's side. He glanced at her. She felt the shift of his attention even without seeing his face. "He wants proof," Tae-jun said low. "That you have what you say you have." "What kind of proof?" "A sample. Specific account numbers. Something that can't be guessed." She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Give me the phone," she said. Tae-jun hesitated. Half a second, no more. He gave her the phone. She raised it to her ear. "Mr. Yoon," she said in English. A pause on the other end. Then, in accented but precise English, "Miss Brooks, you want proof that I carry the records?" "I want to understand what I'm dealing with," he said. "Yes." "The Jeju Maritime account," she said, "registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Heian Capital Partners. Opened in March 2009. Current dormant balance as of the last transaction recorded in the data, $412 million US. The account officer at the registering bank was a man named Lim Cheol-soo, who is currently a deputy minister in the South Korean Finance Ministry, and who has been receiving quarterly payments from that account for 11 years through a nominee structure in Singapore. She paused. "Would you like the Singapore entity name, or would you prefer the account numbers for the 3 sub-accounts used to pass the payments through?" Silence on the line. Complete silence for 4 full seconds. "The Singapore entity," Yoon said. His voice had changed. She gave it to him. She heard him exhale. "You understand what you're carrying," he said. "I understand exactly what I'm carrying," she said. "Then you understand that there are people far more powerful than me who will want it, who will not stop at hotel lobbies and corporate offices. The Finance Ministry. 3 sitting members of the National Assembly. The director of—" "I know who's in these records, Mr. Yoon," she said. "I've been reading them for the last 2 hours." "Then you know that releasing them destroys everything, both sides, his organization and mine." "I know. And you're prepared to do that," She stood in the fourth-floor corridor of a Seoul office building with a gun in one hand and a phone in the other and blood dried on her cheekbone, and her father's voice somewhere in the architecture of her memory saying, "The Saebyuk hours." The best thinking happens before the world starts making noise. "What I'm prepared to do," she said, "is walk out of this building with the man beside me and the information in my head and a very specific list of the people whose names are in these records, and make a decision from a position of safety about what happens next." She paused. "What you're prepared to do is release the 6 men you have in that room, including the man you're using as leverage who deserves considerably worse than what you're about to give him, and step back from a situation that has cost you 4 men and an inside asset and is going to cost you considerably more if you push it to the next level. And if I don't..." She looked toward where Tae-jun was standing. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel him beside her. The specific weight of him, the stillness, the way he was waiting for whatever came next with the patience of a man who had built 12 years of an empire on the ability to wait for exactly the right moment. "If you don't," she said, "you'll spend the rest of your life being the man who had the ledger in his hands and let it walk away. And every name in these records will know that you had it and lost it, and they will spend the rest of your life making you pay for that." A long silence. Then, "You're not afraid." "I'm calculating," she said. "That's different." She heard distantly the sound of the conference room door handle turning from the inside. And in the corridor, Tae-jun's hand found hers in the dark. Not the grip of a protector, not the hold of a man managing an asset, but the specific, unguarded contact of someone reaching for the only solid thing in a room that was about to... The conference room door opened all the way. She heard it in the change of acoustics, the room exhaling into the corridor, the specific pressure shift of a sealed space becoming an open one. Footsteps. Multiple sets, slow. The careful movement of men who had been told to stand down and were processing the instruction with the reluctant compliance of people whose hands still wanted to do something. Tae-jun's hand released hers. She didn't mark the moment. She filed it and kept moving. Song came out last. She knew it was him by the way the other footsteps reorganized around him. A slight deference in the spacing, the automatic distance that people keep from someone with authority, even when that authority is in the process of catastrophic collapse. He was in his 60s, she estimated from the weight of his tread, a heaviness in the joints that came from decades of carrying a body that had been through significant stress. He walked like a man who had been expecting this day for a long time and had not slept well because of it. He stopped when he was 3 feet from her. She could feel him looking at her. "You know who I am," she said. A pause that confirmed it before he spoke. "I knew your father," he said. His Korean accent was heavy, but his English was precise. The English of a man who had conducted international business for 20 years. "I knew him well." "I know exactly how well you knew him," she said. The corridor was very quiet. Tae-jun was somewhere to her right, still as architecture. Waiting with the specific quality of waiting she'd come to understand meant he had already made his decision and was giving the situation room to arrive at the same conclusion on its own schedule. Song breathed out, a long, slow exhalation that had the texture of something that had been held for a very long time. "I had reasons," he said. "I know you did," Amara said. "They're in the records too, the payments, the timelines, the sequence of what you gave them, and when." She paused. "I know why you started. I know what they had on you. I know the exact moment you understood there was no way back." She kept her face toward him, her sightless eyes somewhere in the region of his chest. "I'm not going to tell you the reasons weren't real. I'm going to tell you they don't change what my father's car looked like on the I-94 at 11:15 on a Tuesday night." Song said nothing. "Where is Yoon?" Tae-jun said. His voice, from her right, was the temperature of the space between things. "He left," Kim said, from somewhere near the stairwell. "Car pulled out 60 seconds ago. He's running." "Let him run," Tae-jun said. Kim paused. "Sir." "Let him run," Tae-jun said again. Same tone, same temperature. "He'll go to ground. He'll spend the next 6 months waiting to see what we do with what she's carrying. That's a better cage than anything we build for him tonight." Amara heard the geometry of it, Yoon contained by uncertainty, by the knowledge that everything he'd built was catalogued in the memory of a woman he couldn't reach without making the situation worse. A man with the ledger over his head indefinitely was a man who couldn't move. "And Song," Kim said. Taejun didn't answer immediately. She heard him cross the corridor, heard him stop in front of the older man. The silence between them had 22 years of shared history in it, 22 years of meetings and operations, and a funeral where Song had stood at the graveside of the man he'd helped put there. "My father trusted you completely," Taejun said. Song said nothing. He said once, "I was 16, I didn't understand what it meant yet." He said, "Song is the one man I don't have to watch." He said that like it was the highest thing one man could say about another. A pause. "I understood it eventually. It took me years, but I understood it." Taejun. "Don't." The word was quiet and absolute. "Whatever you're about to say, don't." Another silence. "The police will want him," Amara said. Not as a suggestion, as information being placed on a table for people to do with as they chose. "Yes," Taejun said. "The records I'm carrying give prosecutors in 3 countries everything they need for cases that will outlast everyone in this corridor," she said. "Which means Song's value to anyone is now entirely determined by how cooperative he decides to be." She heard Song's breathing change, the specific rhythm of a man receiving information that restructures his available futures. "I'll cooperate," Song said. His voice had aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. "I know you will," Amara said. Taejun stepped back. She heard him, 1 step, 2, putting distance between himself and the man who had been his father's most trusted lieutenant. The way you put distance between yourself and something that has burned you, not in anger, but in the simple necessity of not being near the heat anymore. "Kim," he said. "Handle it." "Yes, sir." She heard Kim move, heard the reorganization of the corridor, Taejun's men redistributing, Song being walked toward the stairwell, the Chungmu office, returning to something that functioned by the logic of consequences rather than the logic of crisis. Taejun came to stand beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "It's not over," she said. "The names in the records, the finance ministry official, the National Assembly members, the account structures. I know. That's months of work, possibly years. Getting the information into the right hands in a form that can be used without—" "I know," he said again, not cutting her off, acknowledging. She nodded once. "I need coffee," she said, "and I need someone to look at my cheekbone." In that order. She heard something move through him that wasn't quite a sound, the exhalation of a man releasing something he'd been holding since Busan, since the phone call on the hotel roof, since the lobby the night before when a stranger had crashed into him in a monsoon and the world had shifted on its axis in a way he was still measuring. "Come on," he said. They went down together. The Hansong Imperial Hotel looked different in daylight. She couldn't see it, but she could feel the difference. The way the lobby sounded when it was operating at full capacity, the morning percussion of a luxury hotel functioning as it was designed to function. Coffee smells from the restaurant. The subdued murmur of guests who had no idea that the building they'd slept in had been locked down for 40 minutes at dawn. The particular white noise of a place that had been built to absorb extraordinary things and present an ordinary face. She sat in a chair near the lobby's east side while a woman who identified herself as the hotel's house physician examined her cheekbone with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been asked to be discreet about injuries before. The verdict was a significant contusion, no fracture, ice for 48 hours, and the dry delivery of a woman who had made her peace with the nature of her employer's guests. "You'll bruise," the doctor said. "I know," Amara said. "Badly. For about 10 days. I've had worse." A pause. Then the doctor said, carefully, "I'm sure you have," and moved on. Taejun sat across from her. She could feel him there, 3 feet, the coffee table between them, the lobby's ambient noise creating a kind of privacy in its own way, the way city noise did. Too much sound for anyone to hear a specific conversation without being close enough to be obvious. He put a coffee in front of her. She found it by the heat, the ceramic warm under her palm. "Ryu's daughter," she said. "She's in Busan by now. I have a safe house there, so—" Not connected to any syndicate property. His ex-wife is with her. They'll be there until this resolves. He'll go to prison. Yes, for some of it. Not for the daughter's sake. For the 4 months of intelligence he fed to an organization that killed 2 of my men in Busan. A pause. But she'll be safe. Whatever happens to him, that part holds. She nodded. The man from the corridor, she said. Chang. Hospital. He'll recover. He's given us 3 hours of useful information already, from what Kim tells me. A brief pause. He's motivated to continue. And the 2 outside the barriers? In custody. Mine, not the police's. For now. She held the coffee between both hands. The warmth of it was almost too much and exactly enough. You knew, she said, when you got back, when you saw me standing over Ryu. She said it without accusation, because it wasn't an accusation. It was a piece of the picture she was still assembling. You came through that door expecting to rescue someone. You found something else. A pause. Yes, he said. What did you think? He was quiet for a moment that wasn't evasion. It was the pause of a man finding the precise word for something he had spent a long time thinking imprecisely. I thought, he said, that your father knew exactly what he was doing. She felt that land in the specific way of a sentence that is true from multiple directions simultaneously. He was terrified, she said. Whatever he showed you and your father, whatever he showed the world, he was terrified most of my childhood. I could feel it. He thought he was hiding it. He wasn't. She paused. I used to think it was about the work, the money, the organizations he'd gotten involved with. I thought he was afraid of the consequences of what he'd built. He wasn't afraid of the consequences for himself, Taejun said. No, she said. He was afraid of the consequences for me. She turned the coffee cup between her palms. All of it was for me. The training, the encoding, every decision he made in the last years of his life was oriented around the question of what happens to Amara if something happens to me. She stopped. He was building contingencies. He just never got to tell me what they were. The lobby moved around them. Guests checked out. Staff moved with the organized efficiency of a hotel that had decided whatever had happened last night was last night's business. The Sabyak Foundation, Amar said, after this is over. When the legal situation resolves and the records have been processed, I want it to continue. Not for me, but the structure of it. There are other people who need the kind of support it provided. Taejun was quiet. That's not a small thing to ask, he said. I know what I'm asking. It means legitimizing something that was built from... I know what it was built from, she said. I also know what it did. Those aren't mutually exclusive facts, and I'm not interested in pretending they are. She paused. You kept a promise for 10 years. I'm asking you to keep a different one going forward. A silence. All right, he said. She nodded. They sat for a while without speaking. The lobby's mourning continued around them. Somewhere near the entrance, she could hear the revolving door turning. The same door she'd pushed through in a monsoon the night before, soaking wet and disoriented, and about to collide with a decade's worth of consequences she didn't know were waiting for her, less than 24 hours ago. It felt like a different unit of measurement entirely. Paso. She went back to the bake suite in the early morning and slept for 4 hours without dreaming. When she woke, the city outside the windows had the particular quality of mid-morning Seoul. The business district fully operational, traffic at its functional peak, the post-storm sky, the specific washed blue of a city that had been cleaned by weather and was now going about its business with the slightly accelerated energy of a place that had been cooped up. She lay on her back and listened to it. She thought about the music. The piece she'd been carrying, the encoded composition her father had built inside the structure of what she'd believed was Dvorak, existed in a peculiar space now. It was evidence. It was data. It was the financial architecture of 2 criminal organizations and the documented proof of a conspiracy that had killed her father and stolen her sight. It was going to spend the next year being parsed by lawyers and prosecutors and financial forensic teams in 3 countries. It was also music. It was also the last thing her father had made. The most careful, most considered, most essentially him thing he had left behind. Not despite the fact that it was encoded financial data, but including that fact. because her father had been someone who understood that the most important information needed to be stored in the most durable vessel, and he had looked at his daughter and understood that she was the most durable vessel he had access to. He had been right. She got up and went to the cello case and opened it. The Guarneri was fine. Temperature acclimated, the wood settled, the strings still at pitch despite everything the case had been through in the last 24 hours. She lifted it out and felt the familiar weight of it, the specific geometry of the instrument that had been her primary language since she was 4 years old. She sat on the edge of the bed and played. Not the encoded piece. Not yet. That would come. In the formal setting it deserved, with the right people listening for the right reasons. She played the Sarabande from Bach's Fifth Cello Suite, which was the piece she played when she needed to think in music rather than words. It was slow and deliberate and deeply serious, and it moved through the room of the Bach suite with its pale walls and cream marble floors, and found the acoustics there were good. The room had been designed for silence, and the cello inhabited it the way water inhabits a well-cut vessel. She played it through once. Then she heard the knock. 3 strikes. Even. Not Kim's drag-heeled consideration, not Ryu's performed authority, not the quick nervous rap of Park Min-soo bringing coffee. A knock she recognized now. The knock of a man who had learned courtesy late and practiced it carefully, and for whom the act of knocking on a door before entering was a more considered gesture than it appeared. "Come in," she said. She didn't stop playing. Taejun opened the door and stopped. She continued the saraband. She heard him cross the room and sit in the chair, the same chair she'd sat in the night before when she'd first opened the cello case and run her hands across the latches checking for damage. He sat, and she played, and the morning light came through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Seoul moved 40 floors below them. She finished the piece. The last note hung in the room for a moment and then released. "My father played that recording for your father," she said. "The saraband. He played it on a tape deck in whatever room they met in." She wasn't asking. "Yes," Taejun said. "The first time I heard it, I thought it was funeral music. My father said I was wrong. He said it was the opposite of funeral music." A pause. "He said it was music for people who were still deciding whether to keep going." She held the cello against her shoulder. "He wasn't wrong," she said, a silence that had none of the tension of their earlier silences. Something had come out of the last 24 hours that was different from what had gone in, and the difference was not comfort exactly. Comfort was too soft a word for what 2 people who had each spent a decade becoming very hard felt in the same room. It was more like the specific quality of being near someone who knew the full shape of what you'd been through and was not diminished by it. "I need to go to the police," she said. "The formal process. Whatever the legal framework is for introducing the records. I'll need representation, I'll need the right contacts in the prosecution service, I have a lawyer," Taejun said. "She's handled sensitive disclosures before. She's clean. I had reason to verify that thoroughly. She needs to know the full scope. She'll handle it." The finance ministry official, the National Assembly members, the account structures go back to 2003. This will take years to fully prosecute. "I know. It will also expose things about the Hanul syndicate that can't be—" "I know," he said again. And this time the repetition was different. Not impatience, not dismissal, but the acknowledgement of a man who had spent the time between the Chungmu office and this room making a decision that had been building for a long time and had arrived at its conclusion sometime in the last few hours. "I've been thinking about that since the roof, since you called me." She waited. "The syndicate as it exists," he said, "is built on infrastructure that's in those records. Shell companies, account structures, operational finance. When the records are processed, most of that infrastructure becomes unusable." He paused. "I've spent 12 years building something on top of my father's foundation. The hotel is legitimate. Several of the holdings are legitimate. There's a version of what I've built that can be extracted from the criminal architecture and survive. That's a long process," she said. "Yes. With no certainty of outcome." "No certainty," he agreed, "but a reasonable probability with the right legal and structural support." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not just talking about surviving the disclosure," she said. "You're talking about choosing it." "I'm talking about not spending the next 20 years waiting for the ledger to drop," he said. "I'm talking about being the one who hands it over rather than the one it's handed over about." A pause. I'm talking about what your father tried to do 10 years ago when he looked for an exit. Except I'm in a position to do it on my own terms instead of his. She thought about her father, about the man who had been in too deep and had tried to find a clean way out and had not survived the attempt, about the specific tragedy of a person with good intentions and insufficient leverage. You have leverage, she said. I have you, he said, and then immediately. That's not what I know what you meant, she said. And she did. She understood the distinction between leverage as asset and leverage as partnership, and she understood which one he was reaching for, even if the word had come out imprecisely. You mean you have the records on your side rather than aimed at you? Yes. And someone who knows how to use them? Yes. She ran her thumb along the cello's lowest string. C, the deepest note on the instrument, the one that lived in the chest rather than the ear. I'm not staying in Seoul, she said. I know. The festival was yesterday. I've missed the check-in, the orientation, the first performance day. I'll need to speak to the committee, see if there's any possibility of... I called the festival director this morning, Taijun said. At 6 a.m. He was unhappy about the hour. He became less unhappy after a brief conversation. She stopped. You called the festival director, she said. You're performing on Thursday, he said. The main stage. The committee was amenable to a rescheduling, given the circumstances. You told the festival director about the circumstances. I told him there had been a personal emergency of a significant nature and that the artist in question was uninjured and prepared to perform. He found this sufficient. She sat with that for a moment. You can't just... She stopped, started again. You can't manage my professional life. No, he agreed. I made one phone call. You can unmake it if you want. She didn't say anything. You should perform, he said. And the simplicity of it, the directness, the absence of the complex machinery of justification was more persuasive than any argument would have been. You came to Seoul to perform. The Guarneri is fine. He paused. You're extraordinary. Your father wasn't wrong about that. And you've spent the last 24 hours doing something that would have broken most people. And you're sitting on the edge of a bed in a hotel room playing Bach like it's the most natural response in the world. You should perform. She felt the bruise on her cheekbone pulse once, a slow throb, and fade. She held the cello. She thought about standing on a stage in a concert hall in Seoul with a 1742 Guarneri and playing music that had lived in her since childhood, and the specific quality of that, of being heard, accurately, by a room full of strangers who didn't know what she'd been through in the last day and would receive the music without any of that history attached. I'll need to practice, she said. You have 2 days. I'll need a room with better acoustics than this. There's a practice room on the 8th floor. It was built for a resident musician my father had an arrangement with in 2007. It's been maintained. She raised an eyebrow. Of course it has. She thought she heard something from him, the ghost of something that wasn't quite amusement, but occupied the space adjacent to it. The sound a man makes when he's not used to being seen clearly, and someone is seeing him clearly, and he's decided he doesn't entirely mind. I'm going to be honest with you about something, she said. All right, the last 24 hours. Everything you told me last night, everything I've learned about what you've been doing for 10 years. I don't have a clean emotional response to it. I don't know if what you did was the right thing, or if it was the guilt-driven compulsion of a man who knew he was adjacent to a catastrophe and couldn't fully separate his obligation from his complicity. She paused. I'm not saying it wasn't real. I'm saying I don't have the vocabulary for it yet. That's fair, he said. And I don't know what the next months look like. The legal process, the prosecution, the restructuring of all of this. I don't know what role I play in it, or what it costs, or whether the woman who plays the cello on Thursday is the same woman who's going to spend the next 2 years in depositions and forensic accounting meetings. She's both, he said. They're not different women. I know that, she said. I'm just noting that she hasn't been given a lot of time to process the transition. No, he agreed. She hasn't. The morning moved around them. The hotel's sounds continued their ordinary language. The percussion of a place going about its business, the city below conducting its vast and different operations, the Han River moving in the same direction it had always moved regardless of what happened on its banks. She put the cello back in its case. Carefully, the way she always put it away, not because she was being overly precious, but because careful handling was a form of respect for something that had survived 3 centuries and deserved the courtesy. She stood up. "The practice room on the 8th floor," she said. "Does it have a piano?" "Yes." "A good one?" "Better than the Steinway upstairs." That seems like an unnecessarily competitive approach to furnishing hotel practice rooms. My father was unnecessarily competitive about most things. She picked up her cane, adjusted it, felt the slight difference in its weight where the blade housing sat. Familiar now, part of the instrument of it, the same way the cello's weight was familiar. "Come with me," she said. She heard him stand. "To the practice room?" he said. "You said your father made you listen to my recordings. You said you listened to the Dvorak 4 times. She turned toward the door. "Come and hear what it actually sounds like when I'm not 19 and terrified." She paused. "It's different." She heard him cross the room, heard him stop beside her. She didn't reach for him, but she didn't move away either, and the 3 inches between them in the doorway had a quality, the quality of 2 people who had been through something together and were standing on the other side of it and had not yet decided what to do with the fact that the other person was still there. "I should warn you," she said. "I play loud." "I've been warned," he said. They walked out into the corridor together. She performed on Thursday. The Seoul International Music Festival's main stage was a hall that seated 1,800 people, and it was full, and the acoustics were exactly what she'd hoped for when she'd booked the festival 2 years ago. A hall built for clarity, for the kind of sound that didn't flatter but revealed, where there was nowhere to hide and no reason to. She walked out with the Guarneri and she sat in the single chair at center stage, and she felt 1,800 people settle into the particular collective silence of an audience choosing to listen. She played for 93 minutes without stopping. She played the Sarabande. She played Elgar. She played 2 of her own compositions, pieces she'd been working on for 3 years that had never felt finished, and that she now understood had been waiting for something she hadn't known she was waiting for. She played them, and they were finished. And at the end, she played the piece her father had given her, not as a data structure, not as evidence, as music, because that was also what it was. Because her father had been careful enough and loving enough to make the 2 things inseparable, to hide the most important information of his life inside something beautiful, so that his daughter would carry it willingly for as long as she needed to. She played it, and somewhere in the middle of the second movement she felt the hall change, the way halls change when everyone in them has stopped thinking about anything except what they're hearing. And she played it through to the end without rushing, without softening, without any of the editorial choices that performance sometimes asked her to make in the name of audience comfort. She played it the way it was. When the last note ended, the hall was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then it wasn't quiet at all. She sat in the sound of it and breathed. Backstage afterward, Kim was waiting, which she hadn't expected, which meant Taejun had sent him, which meant Taejun was being careful about not appearing in her backstage himself, which meant he understood something about the line between keeping a promise and managing someone else's life. She found that she respected the calibration. "He wanted to know if you needed anything," Kim said. "Tell him the acoustics were good," she said. "Tell him the hall was full." Kim relayed this into his phone with the air of a man who had spent 20 years delivering tactical intelligence and was now delivering something he didn't have a category for, but was managing anyway. She heard Taejun's voice through the phone, brief, just 2 words. "What did he say?" she asked. Kim looked at his phone, then at her. He said, "I know." She smiled. She didn't perform it for anyone. It just happened. "Tell him I'll be at the hotel by 10, she said, "and tell him the Steinway upstairs needs tuning. The D string is a 1/4 tone flat." She heard Taejun's voice again before Kim could relay it. He'd apparently heard. Kim listened. Then, "He says he'll have it tuned." "Good," she said. She picked up the cello case, adjusted the straps, felt the familiar weight of it settle across her shoulders. A 1742 instrument that had outlasted empires and wars and every version of the world that had tried to make music irrelevant. She walked out into the Seoul night. The air was cool and clean after the monsoon, the city's familiar roar rebuilt from silence into its full ordinary chaos. She stood on the pavement outside the concert hall and lifted her face to the sky she couldn't see and felt the specific temperature of it. The particular quality of Seoul in the early hours after midnight, a city that never entirely stopped. Somewhere in the city, Yoon Dae-seok was in a room calculating what came next. Somewhere, lawyers were preparing documents that would take years to fully prosecute. Somewhere, Song was in a room with people writing down everything he knew. Somewhere, Ryu Jae-won's daughter was in a safe house in Busan with her mother, learning that the danger had passed for now and trying to understand what now meant. And somewhere 42 floors above her, there was a man sitting with a piano that needed tuning, in a hotel built on foundations that were going to have to be examined carefully in the coming months, having made a decision that would cost him significantly and having made it anyway. Her father had been afraid for most of her childhood. She understood now that the fear had been love in disguise, the specific terror of a person who had built something irreplaceable and knew the world was capable of destroying it. He had spent the last years of his life making her dangerous because he understood that the world required it. He had encoded everything in music because he understood that she would carry music further than she would carry anything else. He had been right. He had been, in the most complete sense of the word, right. She hailed a cab. It pulled over. She heard it before she raised her hand, the pitch of the engine dropping as the driver slowed. She found the door handle and got in. Hansong Imperial Hotel, she said. Gangnam. The driver pulled into traffic. She held the cello case on her lap and listened to Seoul move around her. Its enormous, continuous, ungovernable noise. The sound of 10 million people conducting their lives in the same city at the same hour. She listened to it the way she listened to everything, not for what was presented, but for what was underneath. The structure beneath the surface. The pattern beneath the noise. Her father had taught her that. He had taught her that the most important things were always encoded in something else, that meaning hid inside form, that the real information lived in the intervals between the obvious notes. She had been carrying his last composition since she was 19 years old. She would carry something different now. The cab moved through Seoul's lit streets, and the city went on around her. And Amara Brooks, cellist, daughter, survivor, ledger, sat in the back seat in the dark with her hand on her father's instrument and her face turned toward whatever the morning would bring, not afraid and not certain and not finished, just moving forward, which was, in the end, the only thing that had ever been required. The cab turned onto the bridge over the Han River, and for a moment the city fell away on both sides, just water and wind and the bridge's vibration through the frame of the car. And she pressed her palm flat against the window and felt the cold of the glass and the vast dark of the river below, and she thought, he would have liked this city. He would have liked this hour. She took her hand from the glass. The bridge ended and Seoul resumed, and she was in it, fully, without reservation, carrying everything she'd always carried and knowing at last what it was. The war was over. The shadows were gone. And for the first time in 10 years, she was finally, completely, undeniably free.